Clementine had heard stories about this man. Russell had talked about how Nate non-canonically wanted to kill an elderly couple when he was with him. "Come on, Russ. That was a long time ago," Nate said. "Those old cold crows tried to shoot our heads off. I'd say they got what they deserved." You're a psycho!" Russell exclaimed. He stopped reaching for his gun. He was starting to back away. "You should apologize to him. He's scared of you," the young girl spoke. She was looking up to Nate. Nate gave a questioning look. "Please, for me." Nate sighed and he looked to Russell. "Russ, I'm sorry I put you all through that," Nate said. Russell stopped backing away. He seemed shocked that Nate was listening to the little girl. "I don't even know if I can believe you," Russell said. He seemed to be unconvinced by Nate's change of attitude. "I don't blame you, Russ. I haven't exactly lived a good life. I've taken that I've wanted to kill everyone who's mad at me, crooked, but things have changed," Nate said. "Like I said, Nate is a different person now," Eddie said. Russell seemed to be conflicted up until he looked over at the girl. "Who's she?" Russell asked as he gestured to the girl. Nate smiled. He crouched down to be at eye level with the young girl. "This is my wonderful loving daughter Danielle," Nate said. She smiled as she wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You could call me Danny." "You have a daughter?" Russell asked. He was disturbed by this. Clementine knew why. Russell had mentioned that Nate wasn't very respectful towards women. "Yeah, her mother was a stud. She was a 10 out of 10, Nate said. "She had an amazing Hello, 10-year-old right here," Danielle said. Nate cleared his throat and said, "Anyway, the point is she was stunning. We thought about settling down. I wasn't too sure at the time, but I went with it for a little while anyway. She got pregnant and then Danny was born. As you can imagine, I was devastated. I didn't want a little girl. I wanted a boy, so I left." "Why am I not surprised?" Russell muttered. "When I meet this little rugrat about 2 weeks ago after I met you," Nate said. "Started off a little cleany and cried a lot, but now she's pretty tough." Danielle then shook her head and rolled her eyes. "You're friends with Eddie?" Wyatt asked. "Yeah, I guess so. He's the only one I trust to look after Danny while I'm out and doing runs," Nate said. "Really?" Wyatt asked. He looked over to Eddie and said, "The last I checked, you sucked at babysitting." "Still do," Eddie said. "Come on, give yourself some credit. You're there for me when Dad's out," Danielle said. "So what? Now you have a kid, you think things have changed?" Russell inquired. "You killed those people. You wanted me to kill them." "Look, Russ, I didn't know what to tell you," Nate said. "I thought you would have gotten over it by now." Russell shook his head and he said, "This is a shit show that doesn't prove anything. You're still a piece of shit who does nothing but kill. You're just like Steve." Nate scoffed and he said, "Preaching choir kid." Russell grumbled himself before walking away. "Russ," Gil said. "Leave him alone, Gil," Becca said. Gil looked to the teenager who said, "He needs some time to vent." Gil sighed before leaving the group. Clementine watched and walked over to his parents. She saw her parents sitting next to Gil. Rebecca was signaling her for her to come over. "Well, that was about what I expected," Nate said. "By the way, if I were you, I would try the oatmeal. It's amazing." Eddie scoffed and he said, "You get the same thing every time for dinner." Nate shrugged. "It's just my suggestion." He and Danielle sat next to each other and the two continued to eat. Clementine walked away and went over to her parents. She sat down next to Gil. Her mother gave her a plate of food. "Thanks," Clementine said. "You're welcome," Rebecca said. Before she began eating, she noticed that Eddie and Wyatt were sitting down next to her and Gil. "Who is that man you were talking to?" "I think it's the first time I've ever seen him," Randy asked Eddie and Wyatt. "Nate," Wyatt said. "Russ and I have met him before." "I remember you guys talking about him back at Howe's. Should we leave?" Alvin asked. "Why the hell is a man like that with a little girl?" Rebecca inquired. Clementine could tell that her adoptive mother wasn't happy. "Easy, that's Danielle. She's his daughter," Eddie said. "His daughter?" Rebecca asked. "That doesn't sound right," Alvin said. "Look, I didn't believe it at first, but Danielle said that he is her biological father. I've watched Danny many times for him when he's gone out to scavenge. She has never said anything about him being a terrible father to her, Eddie said. I've known him for a while, and I haven't seen anything that teams seem to suspect. I think he's changed. In his world, when someone changes, it's never for the better, Randy said. He's right, Patricia said. If he was terrible before, he's worse now. Come on, guys. He's still an asshole, but he's not hurting his kid, Eddie said. Come on, Wyatt. Back me up here. You've talked to them. He was looking over to Wyatt. I don't know, Wyatt said. Dude, come on, Eddie said. Eddie, he nearly killed us that night we got separated. I thought I left you to die with that psycho, Wyatt said. You seriously expect me to have you back into defending this guy? Eddie glared at Wyatt and said, No, I guess not. He got up from the table and walked away. Eddie, Wyatt said. Eddie ignored him as he walked away. Wyatt sighed and he said, Damn it. Clementine looked back at her plate and she started to eat. She was starving. It was a nice meal. There was corn, mashed potatoes, gravy, and some meat. Strange, I haven't seen Mike all day, Alvin said. He's completely disappeared after talking to Jonah. I think he wanted to go back to Texas. I overheard him talking about it a couple of times back at Howe's, Wyatt said. So he just left? Rebecca asked. Wyatt shrugged. I don't know. Maybe he's not exactly very social. He's usually kept to himself back at Howe's. Huh? I would have at least killed him for him to say goodbye to everyone, Rebecca said. Yeah, Wyatt said. Well, I guess what's done is done, Alvin said. Clementine continued to eat her dinner as the adults continued to talk. It would have been nice to relax, but she couldn't help but look over at Sarah. It appeared that she stayed away from the rest of the group, recalling on her adoptive father's words. Clementine decided to let her best friend have some space. As after she finished eating, Clementine noticed that many people were leaving the tables. It seemed that they were leaving the factory to head home. She had noticed that Jonah and a boy were approaching the tables at their group was sitting at. So how was dinner? Jonah asked. It was very good, thank you, Rebecca said. You're welcome. Now I need to get down to business, Jonah said. In order for this community to function properly, everyone has to do a job. Tomorrow you'll be given your first set of assignments. Some of you will work in the factory, while others will work at the field. Just out of curiosity, what does this factory exactly do? Luke asked. Jonah smiled and said, I'm glad you asked. We make a variety of tools here. We've also made some bullets. It seemed that everyone was suppressed by that. You know how to make bullets? Wyatt asked. That's impressive. Indeed. I'm afraid that man had taught us the craft since past, but we will continue to fry thanks to him, Jonah said. Jonah, what about the children? Patricia asked. What will they be doing? They'll be looked after by Julie. She's watched Nate's daughter from time to time whenever he's out and Eddie is busy, Jonah said. Thank goodness, Patricia said with a sigh of relief. Any other questions? Jonah asked. What about Sarah? Rebecca asked in a more hushed tone, so the teenager wouldn't hear. I don't think she's ready for any responsibilities. I think she can look after herself. You said she was 15, right? Jonah asked. Yes, but she's still grieving. She lost her father and her boyfriend in the matter of minutes, Rebecca said. Plus, she's got anxiety problems which will only make things worse. Look, I understand where you're coming from. I do. But the needs of the community outweighs the needs of one person. I know that sounds harsh, but it's the law of the land now, Jonah said. He made a gesture to the boy next to him. My boy Jed and I lost my beautiful wife, my daughter, and whatever else was left of our family, after we were attacked by a bunch of raiders around a year and a half ago. I wanted to be there for him. I wanted to grieve, but my community were in chaos. In that raid, we had lost a fearless leader and many other members. Everyone was in a panic. As second in command, I had to step up and restore order. As leader of this community, I have done many things that I have regret doing and made my decisions that disgust me. The hayfield would not exist if I had consoled my son. Clementine was astonished. He seemed to be a good leader. We understand, Luke said. Excellent, Jonah said. On that note, I'd say we turn around in for the night. It's not even late yet, Dad, the boy Jed said. For you, it's not that late, but for the old man like me, it's past my bedtime, Jonah said. Jed scoffed and said, It must suck getting old. Jonah laughed and he said, "Damn right." He then turned back to the group and said, "Anyway, we'll see you all tomorrow." He turned and started walking away. "Good night, Jonah," Luke said. "Night, Jonah," Shell said. As the leader of the community left, it seemed like everyone was getting up from their tables to leave. Clementine watched as Jed approached Sarah. She wondered what he was doing. Eating in the crazy factory was a mystery. Heck, she didn't even want to be around anyone hearing how people were laughing and having a normal conversation. It drove her crazy. It took everything she had to stay in the factory until dinner was over. Sarah had heard someone sitting in front of her. "So, you still interested in my offer?" she heard Jed said. Sarah looked up to him. It didn't take long for her to nod her head. "Cool, follow me," Jed said. He got up from the table and Sarah also got up and followed behind him. However, they were cut off by Luke and Rebecca. "Hold on, where are you two going?" Luke asked. "My place," Jed said as he crossed his arms over his chest. "What's the problem?" Rebecca glared at him. "You know what the problem is. You're dragging a grieving girl to your home and do God knows what to her." Rebecca said, "I'm not dragging her anywhere. She's coming on her free will," Jed said. Rebecca and Luke were shocked upon hearing this. Rebecca turned to Sarah and said, "Sarah, we need to talk this over. You should have told us about this. I don't think you should go to Jed's house like this." Sarah shook her head. "He says he knows how to make me feel better. I'm sick of feeling this way," Sarah said. Luke looked to Jed. "What exactly are you going to do to make her feel better?" Luke asked with a suspicious look. "Relax, I ain't going to lay a finger on her," Jed said. "I don't believe you," Rebecca said. "Well, it ain't up to you two," Jed said. "It's up to her." He made a gesture towards Sarah. "She's a grieving girl," Luke said. "Stop it!" Sarah snapped, which made Luke jump. He wasn't expecting her to do that. She didn't like being put on the spot like this, but she knew that Jed was right. She wasn't a little kid anymore, and she could make her own decisions. "I'm going to do this with or without your consent. As far as I'm concerned, I'm old enough to make these decisions myself." "Sarah, you have to think this through. You don't know this boy," Rebecca said. "I don't care," Sarah said. "I've made my decision." She looked at Jed and waited for him to lead the way. Jed nodded and started to walk away from the group, with Sarah following behind him. Rebecca grabbed her arm and she said, "You may not have a father or mother now, but I've looked after you for a while. I know this isn't you. You're technically still a child until you're 18. So until then, I'll be your guardian. You are not going with that boy." "Funny, you're just like my dad," Sarah said. It was obvious that she had a resentful tone towards Rebecca. "Carlos was overprotective," Rebecca said. "He didn't want you to have a boyfriend. I'm trying to keep you from getting hurt, Sarah. Think about this in the back of your mind. You know how something doesn't feel good about this." Rebecca made a good point, but at the same time, the concept of reason was being overshadowed by grief and still need to relieve some of that grief. Sarah wrestled out of Rebecca's grip. "I'll be home before morning," Sarah said as she walked away from the group to follow Jed. She could feel and hear murmurs from her group as she left. As much as she didn't want to admit that a part of her didn't feel good about this. Sarah and Jed had arrived at the house. "Come on," Jed said, as he went to the gate that would lead to the backyard. "We have to go to the shed. A lot of people wouldn't approve of what I do in there, especially in your group. But I think it's because they don't understand. They have no idea what it feels to lose everyone." Sarah was confused by that statement. "If you still have your dad," Sarah said. Jed scoffed. "He might as well be dead. From the sun up and down, he is working. He is working to improve the community and get more food, more supplies. He's practically never around." She could still hear the disdained voice in his head as she talked about his dad. He must have hid how he felt bad about his dad. She had the opposite problem. Her father was constantly breathing down her own neck. She liked it at first, but then it became overwhelming. "So what was your boyfriend like?" Jed said as he approached the shed. "Why are we talking about this? I thought you were going to help me make me feel better," Sarah said. "I am," Jed said. "But first you have to get angry and let all that anger build up," he said, and he opened the door to the shed. Sarah looked at him with a perplexed stare as she entered the shed. She followed him and was surprised to smell the stench from death and decay. A dim light then turned on from a lantern shelf which illuminated the shed. "You have to excuse the stench," Jed said. Her eyes adjusted to the light. She saw him walk over to the body. Over the arms of the body were missing. She couldn't tell who it was since there was a hood over its head. "Here is the best way to relieve all that anger," Jed said as he removed the hood. The face underneath the hood belonged to a walker, but was missing his lower jaw. "What is this?" Sarah asked. Part of her was horrified by it. "I already told you, this is how you feel better. This is how you get rid of all this anger," Jed said. The walker managed to get to its feet, only to be knocked down by Jed, who had punched it in the abdomen. "You could take it out on this piece of shit."